My name is Serafina Moon, and I am 30 years old. For years ago, a legacy I never anticipated unfolded before me. My grandmother Matilda bequeathed me her 7 acres of rolling meadowland and whispering woods here in Viridian Valley. It was a gift that gently rerouted the river of my life. With patient hands and a hopeful heart, I transformed that land into Havenwood Hollow, a small sanctuary of sustainable farming that has become my deepest joy and truest calling. I could never have fathomed that this peaceful ground, this inheritance of love, would become a battleground, or that the deepest betrayal would come from those who shared my blood. What began as a seemingly ordinary family gathering one sun-drenched Sunday culminated in devastation, a profound shattering of trust, and a legal ordeal that redrew the map of my family forever. If you are listening to this, perhaps from a quiet corner of your own cherished garden, a place where you, too, nurture life, I invite you to join me. Before I share how the hands of my own father brought ruin to the world I had so carefully built, perhaps you'll consider liking this story and subscribing, for these are tales of the heart, and the heart, like the earth, has an immense capacity for healing. My grandmother Matilda and I shared a language spoken not in words, but in the rustle of leaves, the scent of damp earth, and the quiet satisfaction of a day spent tending life. While my parents, Beatrice and Arthur Moon, were dedicated to scaling the heights of their respective careers in law and finance, my childhood summers and weekends were woven into the fabric of Matilda's land. She was my first and wisest teacher in the ways of the earth. I can still feel the texture of her weathered hands, gently guiding mine as we nestled tiny lavender starts into the soil, her soft voice a melodious hum as she explained the intricate dance of companionship between plants, which thrived in proximity, and which needed their own quiet space. "The land has a voice, Serafina dear," she would murmur, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "You only need to learn to listen." And I did, with the full attention of a child discovering a magical world. My parents, bless them, never quite grasped this silent symphony. They had consciously moved away from their own rural roots, embracing the polished efficiency of city life and its tangible rewards. They envisioned a similar trajectory for my older sister, Cassandra, and me. For a time, I walked the path they paved, earning a degree in economics, which pleased them. Yet my heart secretly yearned for the wilder, greener classrooms of botany and environmental science, electives I pursued with a quiet fervor. Grandma Matilda, with her intuitive wisdom, saw this unspoken passion. Throughout my university years, our weekly telephone calls were less about academic achievements and more about the seasonal ballet at Havenwood Hollow, the first apple blossoms, the new composting methods she was exploring, her gentle concerns about the increasingly industrial scale of agriculture encroaching on our valley. While my parents proudly spoke of Cassandra's burgeoning career in high-end event planning in the city, Grandma Matilda would tell her friends at the Oakhaven Farmers Market about my understanding of permaculture and soil health. When Matilda passed from this world 4 years ago, a quiet sorrow settled over us all. The general assumption within the family was that her modest savings and the 7 acres of Havenwood Hollow would be divided between Cassandra and me. The atmosphere at the solicitor's office for the reading of the will was thick with unspoken expectations. Cassandra sat beside our parents, looking poised and confident, already murmuring to Mother about potential uses for a country retreat. Then, Mr. Silas Thorne, Matilda's lifelong friend and solicitor, cleared his throat and read the words that would alter everything. The entirety of Havenwood Hollow, along with a small, carefully established trust for its upkeep, was left solely to me. "To my beloved Serafina," the will read, her familiar script somehow echoing in Mr. Thorne's gentle voice, "who hears the heartbeat of this land and will cherish its spirit. May you cultivate not just sustenance here, but also joy and understanding." The silence that descended was profound, almost palpable. I saw a flush creep up Cassandra's neck, and my parents exchanged quick, unreadable glances. No one spoke for a long moment. Finally, my father broke the stillness, his smile a little too tight. "Well, Serafina," he said, his tone attempting casualness, "I imagine you'll do the sensible thing, sell the property, and of course, you'll share the proceeds equitably with Cassandra." I didn't reply. I couldn't. Because in that moment, a seed of a dream, long dormant within me, began to unfurl, watered by Matilda's unwavering faith. 2 weeks later, I tendered my resignation at the corporate communications firm where I worked. My parents were, to put it mildly, dismayed. My colleagues whispered concerns about a possible quarter-life crisis. But for the first time in my adult life, I felt a deep, resonant certainty about the path ahead. I moved into Matilda's simple, sturdy farmhouse, its walls imbued with her gentle spirit, and began to lay the foundations of my new life. The first year was a crucible. The old farmhouse, though charming, yearned for repairs. The soil, neglected during Matilda's final illness, required patient rehabilitation. I learned through countless mistakes, through aching muscles and sunburnt skin. My savings dwindled, and my days stretched from before dawn till long after dusk. My hands, once accustomed to keyboards, grew calloused and earth-stained. The polished veneer my mother had always encouraged me to maintain chipped away, revealing something more authentic beneath. Yet, by the second year, Havenwood Hollow began to breathe with a new vitality. 3 spacious polytunnels rose against the skyline, promising year-round abundance. The vegetable gardens expanded, covering nearly 3 acres, a vibrant tapestry woven with the principles of companion planting and crop rotation that Matilda had taught me. I planted a small orchard of heritage plum and damson trees, their blossoms a fragrant promise of future harvests. Beehives hummed contentedly at the edge of the wildflower meadow I'd allowed to flourish, and a gravity-fed irrigation system, collecting rainwater from the barn roof, whispered through the rows. Slowly, the local community began to take notice. Chefs from Oak Haven's best restaurants sought out my produce, praising its flavor and the care with which it was grown. I secured a cherished spot at 2 weekly farmers' markets, and a small, loyal group of families subscribed to my weekly harvest boxes, filled with the freshest offerings from the hollow. The farm wasn't making me wealthy in the way my parents understood wealth, but it was self-sustaining and growing with a steady, organic rhythm. More importantly, I was content in a way I had never known. My life settled into a rhythm dictated by the seasons and the needs of the land. Mornings began with the birdsong, tending to the tender seedlings, harvesting for the day's orders. Afternoons were for mending fences, turning compost, planning future sowings, and managing the quiet hum of the business from a small desk in what had once been Matilda's sun-drenched sewing room. Evenings were often spent preserving the bounty, jewel-toned jams and chutneys lining the pantry shelves, or poring over books on biodynamic farming, my mind always eager to learn more. The farmhouse itself began to reflect this new chapter. I kept Matilda's beloved antique Welsh dresser and her worn-oak kitchen table, but I painted the walls in soft, earthy tones and replaced heavy curtains with simple linen blinds that invited the light and the views of the fields. The kitchen, once a little dim, became the true heart of the home, its open shelves displaying the colorful jars from my harvests, a testament to the land's generosity. It wasn't a showpiece, but it was real, and it was entirely mine. For 2 years, my family kept a polite, somewhat bewildered distance. My parents would visit occasionally, their comments gently nudging, asking when I might tire of this rustic phase and return to a proper career. Cassandra, busy with her life in the city, would call on birthdays and at Christmas, her interest in my agricultural endeavors fleeting. I was too immersed in the demanding, rewarding work of Havenwood Hollow to let their subtle disapproval cast too long a shadow. The land was nurturing me, just as Matilda had hoped. But the gentle equilibrium of my life began to shift when Cassandra returned to Viridian Valley. Cassandra's reappearance was rather sudden. Her ambitious event-planning business, which had always seemed so glamorous from afar, had faltered, leaving her with considerable debts and a bruised spirit. At 34, she moved back into our parents' sprawling home on the outskirts of Oakhaven, a temporary measure, she assured everyone, while she recalibrated. It was then that the undercurrents within our family dynamic began to tug with a new, unsettling strength. The first time Cassandra visited Havenwood Hollow after her return, I was genuinely pleased to see her, eager to share the world I had built. I walked her through the polytunnels, now lush with burgeoning tomatoes and fragrant herbs, explained my no-dig gardening methods, and sent her home with baskets overflowing with fresh produce. Her response was tepid. "It's all very quaint, Serafina," she remarked, her gaze lingering on my soil-stained hands with a hint of something I couldn't quite name. "But honestly, don't you think there are more lucrative uses for all this land? Property values in Viridian Valley have skyrocketed. This place must be worth a small fortune." I laughed it off, attributing her pragmatism to the recent sting of her own business failure. But her comments persisted during subsequent visits. "Do you have any idea of the development potential here?" she mused one afternoon, ostensibly helping me tie up raspberry canes, though her touch was hesitant, unfamiliar. "Damien says land like this, with these views, is going for astronomical sums compared to what Grandma Matilda paid for it." Damien, I soon learned, was Damien Rexford, the sleek property developer she had recently begun dating, a man whose polished shoes and expensive watch seemed out of place amidst the rustic charm of the hollow, and whose eyes seemed to assess my land with a cool, appraising gaze during the one occasion Cassandra brought him along. My parents soon began to subtly echo Cassandra's sentiments during our infrequent family dinners. "You're just one person, Serafina, dear," my mother, Beatrice, would say, her voice soft but insistent. "It's an awful lot of land for a single woman to manage. Wouldn't it be more sensible to consider developing a small portion? You could still keep a lovely garden, of course." "A garden?" I repeated, a small pang of hurt tightening my chest. It was astonishing how they could reduce my thriving, sustainable farm, my livelihood, to a mere hobby. "This is my business, Mother. It's viable and it's growing. But is it the optimal use of a significant family asset?" my father, Arthur, countered, his tone reasonable, persuasive, the one he used when chairing board meetings. "Cassandra needs a fresh start, a chance to rebuild. You're in a position to help your sister, Serafina, if you weren't quite so attached to every square inch." These conversations became more frequent, the pressure more overt. What had begun as gentle suggestions slowly morphed into pointed remarks about my perceived stubbornness, my hoarding of what they increasingly termed family wealth. The fact that Matilda had specifically, unequivocally, left Havenwood Hollow to me seemed to fade into an inconvenient detail in their narrative. One warm evening, I stopped by my parents' house to retrieve a set of tools I'd lent my father. As I approached the patio, I overheard their voices, low and earnest, drifting from the twilight-shrouded garden. "The back 3 acres are practically unused," Cassandra was saying, her voice clear and decisive. "Damien has had his surveyors look, informally, of course. We could easily accommodate 4, perhaps 5, luxury homes there with a sympathetic zoning variance. Serafina just needs to see the bigger picture, the family obligation." My father's reply was a low murmur. "Your grandmother always wanted to provide for both her granddaughters." I retreated silently, my heart thudding a painful rhythm against my ribs. That night, I contacted a local security firm and arranged for the discreet installation of several wildlife cameras around the perimeter of Havenwood Hollow. I told myself it was merely a sensible precaution for a rural property, that my family, despite their words, would never actively seek to harm what I had built. But a knot of unease had tightened in my stomach, a premonition I couldn't quite shake. The situation intensified when Cassandra announced her engagement to Damien Rexford after a whirlwind 4-month courtship. My parents were overjoyed, hosting an opulent engagement party at their home. Cassandra, radiant in a designer dress, flashed an impressively large diamond, while Damien, exuding charm and confidence, spoke animatedly to my father's associates about investment opportunities and prime real estate. "We're considering a signature development in Viridian Valley," he mentioned to one of my father's friends, his voice carrying clearly to where I stood nursing a glass of elderflower cordial. "Something rather exclusive, blending sustainable luxury with the natural beauty of the area. We have our eye on a particularly promising parcel of land." His gaze flickered towards me for a fleeting second, and a chill traced its way down my spine despite the warmth of the summer evening. After the engagement, the pressure became almost unbearable. My mother's calls became a daily occurrence, each one presenting a new angle on why I should share my good fortune with Cassandra. "Your sister has always had such a difficult time with things, Serafina," she'd sigh. "You've always been the fortunate one, first with Matilda's obvious preference for you, and now with this substantial inheritance." As an olive branch, a genuine attempt to bridge the widening gulf, I suggested to Cassandra that she could bring her event planning skills to Havenwood Hollow. We could develop workshops, farm-to-table dinners, even small weddings, I offered, hoping to find common ground. "There's so much potential here, Cassandra. We could build something together, something that benefits us both." Her response was dismissive, tinged with impatience. "Serafina, darling, I appreciate the thought, but I'm not interested in playing in the mud. Damien and I have significant, professional plans. We're thinking on a much larger scale." The final, chilling precursor came when I discovered one of my main irrigation pipes, deep within the hazel copse, had been deliberately punctured, not simply burst. The damage was precise, clearly inflicted by someone who understood the system. It caused a section of my newly planted squash to become waterlogged. There was no proof, of course, no culprit to identify, but the act felt targeted, malicious. I added a few more cameras, particularly around the access points to the farm, and began to meticulously document everything: daily photographs of the crops, detailed logs of harvests, equipment inventories, and meticulous records of sales and expenses. A part of me recoiled from the suspicion that my own family could be plotting against me, but as spring deepened into summer, the air grew thick with an unspoken tension, building towards an inevitable reckoning. The Sunday gathering at my parents' house was a monthly custom, a fragile thread of connection I'd tried to maintain despite our ever-diverging paths. That particular Sunday in late June began like many others, yet an indefinable sense of unease settled over me the moment I turned into their manicured driveway. Cassandra's new sapphire blue convertible, a rather ostentatious vehicle for someone supposedly navigating financial difficulties, was parked assertively at the front. My mother, Beatrice, greeted me at the door with a smile that seemed a shade too bright, the kind she reserved for important business associates. My father, Arthur, was uncharacteristically solicitous, taking my light linen jacket and immediately offering me a glass of freshly squeezed orange juice, as he knew I didn't drink alcohol before early evening. Cassandra was already seated at the dining table, elegant in an outfit that likely cost more than my monthly farm expenditure, her perfectly manicured fingers tapping impatiently at her phone. "Serafina, so glad you could make it," she said, her voice smooth, without looking up. The table was laid with more formality than usual, with the seldom-used bone china and crystal glasses, usually reserved for Christmas or significant anniversaries. Throughout the meal, the conversation skimmed the surface of things. Mother inquired about my little vegetable patch rather than my farm. Father recounted an encounter with a former schoolmate. Cassandra occasionally angled her hand so her engagement ring caught the light, a silent, glittering pronouncement. I answered their questions politely, a growing awareness dawning as I noticed the subtle, exchanged glances between them when they thought I wasn't observing. As we finished the main course, my father cleared his throat, placing his napkin beside his plate with a deliberate, almost ceremonial air. "Serafina," he began, "we need to have a serious discussion about the land situation." The atmosphere in the room, already strained, grew heavy. Mother straightened her posture, a look of resolve settling on her face, while Cassandra finally set down her phone, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. "What land situation, Dad?" I asked, my voice calm, though a familiar apprehension fluttered in my chest. "Your grandmother Matilda's property," Arthur continued, his voice adopting the measured, authoritative tone he employed in complex negotiations, or, to be more precise, the family property that you are currently occupying. "It's not a family property in that sense, Dad," I corrected gently. "Grandma Matilda left Havenwood Hollow specifically to me." Her will was very clear. "That's merely a legal technicality, dear," my mother interjected, her voice smooth as silk. Matilda, in her later years, couldn't possibly have foreseen the current circumstances. She would have wanted to ensure both her granddaughters were looked after, provided for. Cassandra leaned forward, her eyes bright with an almost fervent intensity. "The thing is, Serafina, Damien and I have this incredible opportunity. We've been liaising with his development partners for months now, drawing up preliminary concepts, and they are exceptionally enthusiastic about the potential." "Plans for what?" I asked, though the sinking feeling in my stomach told me I already knew the answer. It was a cold dread, spreading through me like winter frost on a pane of glass. "Serene Meadows Luxury Enclave," Cassandra announced, a note of triumph in her voice as she produced a glossy, professional-looking brochure from a leather satchel beside her chair. She opened it to reveal artistic renderings of sprawling, modern houses nestled amidst manicured lawns and ornamental trees. My breath caught in my throat. My stomach plummeted as I recognized the familiar contours of my land, of Havenwood Hollow, completely obliterated, replaced by these soulless structures. The gentle slope leading to my beloved pond, the ancient, gnarled oak tree that stood sentinel at the edge of the woods, all reimagined as backdrops for a community lifestyle center. This is Havenwood Hollow?" I whispered, my voice barely audible, as I traced the outline of my pond, now depicted as a picturesque water feature. "Actually, we've refined the branding," Damien said, materializing from the kitchen doorway where he had, apparently, been waiting for his cue. He looked sleek, confident. "Serene Meadows tested much better with our target demographic in focus groups." I stared at them, a wave of disbelief washing over me, so profound it momentarily stole my ability to speak. "You've been making development plans for my land, without even discussing it with me?" "We are discussing it now, Serafina," my father said, his voice firm, brooking no argument. "This is a family matter, and it's time you began to consider what is truly best for everyone involved, not just your own preferences." Cassandra slid another document across the polished mahogany table, a formal-looking agreement. "We're not asking for everything, Serafina. Just the 3 back acres, the ones you barely use. You can keep the farmhouse, of course, and enough land for your gardening." "My farm is not a hobby, Cassandra. It's my livelihood." I finally found my voice, a tremor of indignation running through it despite my efforts to remain composed. "And this is not a family decision. Grandma Matilda entrusted Havenwood Hollow to me because she knew I would preserve its spirit, not allow it to be paved over and sold off in parcels." "Oh, don't be so melodramatic, Serafina," my mother sighed, a flicker of impatience in her eyes. "It's a very sophisticated, ecologically sensitive development. Look, Damien has even incorporated a small community garden area as a respectful nod to the property's agricultural history." I glanced down at the rendering, at a small, overly neat plot labeled "The Heritage Patch," my years of toil, my sustainable farming operation that supplied fresh, organic produce to restaurants and families throughout Viridian Valley, now reduced to a quaint, decorative afterthought for affluent homeowners. "This is not going to happen," I said, my voice quiet but resolute as I gently pushed the documents back across the table. "I am not surrendering my land. I am not betraying Matilda's trust." My father's face hardened, his jaw tightening. "Serafina, be reasonable. Cassandra deserves her share of the family legacy too. Your sister needs this opportunity, this chance to establish herself. As her family, as her sister, it is your responsibility to support her. And if I choose not to? I challenged, meeting his gaze, though my heart ached at the coldness I saw there. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet. My father leaned forward, his voice low, controlled, yet carrying an undeniable weight of threat. Then you are choosing this. This patch of dirt over your own flesh and blood. If you refuse to help your sister, Serafina, then don't expect this family to be there for you when your little farming experiment inevitably falters. Dad? I whispered, the word catching in my throat, shocked by the starkness of his ultimatum, by the transactional nature of his love. Cassandra jumped in then, her voice softer, almost conciliatory, but with an underlying steel that was somehow more menacing. It's just business, Serafina. Progress. Land like this, in this location, is going to be developed sooner or later. Wouldn't you rather it be managed within the family, by people who understand its potential, rather than by strangers? Just sign over the 3 acres. You'll receive a percentage of the profits from the development. It's a win-win. Everyone benefits. I rose slowly from my chair, gathering my bag, my composure a fragile shield against the storm of emotions raging within me. No, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Grandma Matilda trusted me with Havenwood Hollow. I will not break that faith. You ungrateful girl, my mother hissed, her carefully constructed composure finally cracking, her face flushed with anger. After everything we have done for you, everything we have provided. Like what, mother? I retorted, the pain finally giving way to a surge of clarity. Like dismissing my life's work? Like plotting behind my back to take what is legally and morally mine? Like commissioning development plans for a property that you do not own? You will live to regret this selfishness, Serafina, my father said, standing so abruptly that his chair scraped harshly against the wooden floor. Mark my words. You are making a profound and costly mistake. I walked towards the door, tears stinging my eyes, held back only by a fierce, burgeoning resolve. The mistake, I said, pausing with my hand on the doorknob, was my believing that you respected my choices, or that you truly cared about what Grandma Matilda wanted for this land, for me. As I stepped out into the too bright sunshine, I heard Cassandra call after me, her voice sharp with frustration. This isn't over, Serafina. That land belongs to this family, not just to you. I drove home to Havenwood Hollow with hands that trembled on the steering wheel, the weight of their betrayal a physical ache in my chest. They had never truly seen my farm as a legitimate endeavor, as a reflection of my soul. To them, it was merely a valuable commodity, an asset being squandered on vegetables and wildflowers instead of yielding maximum financial return. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that our relationship, the very fabric of our family, had been irrevocably torn. The morning after that devastating Sunday, a cold clarity settled over my anxiety. I channeled the turmoil into purposeful action. I telephoned the security firm again, arranging for an immediate upgrade to my existing system, more cameras, higher resolution, broader coverage, ensuring every approach to Havenwood Hollow was monitored. The young technician, a kind local lad, seemed perplexed by my quiet urgency, but worked efficiently, his brow furrowed in concentration as he mounted the final camera overlooking my main polytunnel. Expecting to grow gold bullion out here, Ms. Moon? He joked, wiping his hands on his overalls. Just safeguarding what's precious to me, I replied, unable to voice the chilling truth that the potential threat wasn't from strangers, but from my own kin. That afternoon, my phone chimed with a text message from Cassandra. Last chance to see sense, Serafina. Dad and Damien have a meeting with the Viridian Valley Planning Council tomorrow morning. It would be far better for you to cooperate with us than to oppose us. I didn't reply, but the message sent a shiver of apprehension through me. Instead of succumbing to the fear, I spent the remainder of the day in a state of focused activity, methodically documenting every aspect of Havenwood Hollow. I photographed each cultivated bed, every ripening fruit tree, each piece of vital equipment. I updated my already detailed inventory lists and carefully collated copies of all my business records, from sales receipts to supplier invoices. A deep-seated intuition, a whisper from some resilient part of my spirit, told me I might soon need irrefutable proof of what I had painstakingly built. The next 2 days passed in a state of heightened tension, a watchful stillness. I found myself startling at every unexpected sound: the snap of a twig in the woods, the distant bark of a dog, half expecting a confrontation, a further escalation. But nothing happened. Wednesday arrived, a crucial day for Havenwood Hollow. I had deliveries scheduled for 3 of my most valued restaurant clients in Oak Haven. It was typically my highest revenue day of the week, and the farm's finances, though stable, couldn't absorb the loss of that income. Despite the knot of unease in my stomach, I was carefully arranging heirloom tomatoes, vibrant reds, deep purples, sunny yellows, into their transport crates when my phone shrilled. It was Mr. Gideon, my elderly neighbor, whose farm adjoined mine to the west, a man who had been a dear friend to Grandma Matilda for decades. "Serafina, you need to get back to the hollow right now." His voice was thin, shaking with distress. "Your father, he's here with some sort of digging machine. He's tearing up your fields, child." My blood turned to ice in my veins. "Call the constabulary, Mr. Gideon." "Please," I managed to say, my own voice strained, already abandoning the tomatoes and sprinting towards my old pickup truck. "I'm about 15 minutes away." The drive back to Havenwood Hollow was a nightmarish blur of familiar roads seen through a prism of disbelief and rising horror. All I could picture were my meticulously tended crops, my livelihood, the very soul of my farm, being brutally erased. I tried calling my father, but his phone went straight to voicemail. The same with my mother, and then Cassandra. A cold, sick dread coiled in my stomach. As I turned onto the unpaved track leading to Havenwood Hollow, I heard it before I saw it, the guttural roar and metallic clang of heavy machinery. Then, rounding the final bend, where the track opened out to view my main fields, the scene that met my eyes stole the breath from my lungs. There was my father, Arthur Moon, a man I'd always known as a creature of boardrooms and tailored suits, perched atop a small, bright yellow bulldozer, carving wide, destructive swaths through my lovingly cultivated vegetable beds. One of my smaller polyunnels, the one nurturing my tender salad greens, was already a mangled ruin of twisted metal and torn plastic. A significant portion of my main crop field, where my prized squashes and beans were nearing harvest, was a churned-up wasteland of uprooted plants and severed irrigation lines. I slammed the truck to a halt, the tires skidding on the loose gravel, and leapt out, my mobile phone already in my hand, its camera recording as I ran, stumbling, towards him. "Dad, stop. What are you doing? What in God's name are you doing?" He saw me, his head snapping around, but he didn't stop the machine. He continued to bulldoze through a flourishing row of bell pepper plants, their vibrant fruits crushed beneath the steel tracks. "This has gone on long enough, Serafina," he shouted, his voice barely audible above the engine's roar, his face contorted in a mask of fury I had never witnessed before. "You had your opportunity to be reasonable, to be part of this family. This is my property. You're destroying my business, my life." I screamed, my voice cracking as I circled, desperate to get into his direct line of sight, to somehow break through his rage. It was then, with a fresh wave of sickness, that I noticed my mother's familiar silver car parked at the edge of the property, tucked partially behind the old oak. Beatrice sat rigidly in the passenger seat, her hands covering her face, while Cassandra stood beside the vehicle, her arms crossed, watching the unfolding devastation with a chillingly stoic, almost satisfied, expression. "Dad, please, I'm begging you, stop." I tried again, edging closer despite the inherent danger, the sheer unpredictability of his actions. "This is illegal. You can't just do this." He swung the bulldozer, with terrifying precision, towards my newest, largest polytunnel, the one that housed my entire tomato crop. "This land belongs to your sister now," he bellowed, his voice raw with a possessive anger that seemed to emanate from his very core. "You should have signed the papers when you had the chance." And then, with a sickening crash of metal against metal, glass shattering, he drove the machine straight into the structure. Months of my hard work, my investment, my hopes, collapsing into a ruin of debris in mere seconds. In that same moment, a distant but distinct sound cut through the air, the approaching wail of sirens. Mr. Gideon, true to his word, had called for help. Still recording, my hand shaking so violently I could barely hold the phone steady, I backed away towards the driveway to meet the approaching police vehicles, panning the camera slowly to capture the full, heartbreaking extent of the carnage. 2 constabulary cars, blue lights flashing, pulled up moments later. As the uniformed officers approached, their expressions grim as they took in the scene of deliberate destruction, my father finally cut the engine of the bulldozer. He climbed down, suddenly seeming smaller, less formidable, as if the realization of the magnitude of his actions was just beginning to penetrate his fury. "What's been going on here, then?" the first officer, a tall, stern-faced sergeant, asked, his gaze sweeping from the demolished polytunnel to my father, then to me. My father attempted to compose himself, to smooth down his disheveled clothing. "Just a small family disagreement, officer," he said, his voice regaining some of its familiar, authoritative calm, the urbanity a grotesque counterpoint to the rural devastation surrounding him. "A misunderstanding about the use of some family land. My daughter and I were having a robust discussion. He's destroying my farm." I cried out, my voice hoarse, still holding up my phone, the recording light a small, defiant beacon. "This is my property. I own it outright, legally. I have the deed in my name. He came onto my land without permission and has caused tens of thousands of pounds worth of damage." "She's being overly dramatic, officer," Cassandra interjected, striding forward to stand protectively beside our father, her chin high. "This is family land. We are merely reclaiming what should have been shared equitably from the start." The officers separated us, calmly and professionally, taking initial statements while further police resources, including a photographer, arrived. I hurried into the farmhouse, my legs unsteady, and retrieved the property deed from the small fireproof safe where Matilda had always kept important documents. I also showed them the footage from my newly upgraded security cameras. The videos were damningly clear. They showed my father arriving with the bulldozer on a flatbed trailer, my mother and Cassandra following in their car, and then the deliberate, methodical destruction that ensued. "These cameras are new, are they?" my father sputtered, his composure finally cracking when the sergeant mentioned the clarity of the footage. "She's just put them up. It's an entrapment." "So you're admitting you were aware you were planning to commit this act of damage when you arrived, Mr. Moon?" the sergeant asked, his voice quiet, his gaze unwavering. My father fell silent, his face paling as the implications of his angry outburst, his unwitting admission, began to sink in. The police meticulously documented everything, taking countless photographs of the ruined crops, the flattened polytunnels, the deep gouges in the earth. They took a detailed statement from Mr. Gideon, who had witnessed a significant portion of the destruction from his own property line. An officer with experience in agricultural assessments made a preliminary estimate of the damage, placing it at well over £60,000, factoring in the destroyed structures, the specialized equipment, and the loss of the current and future crop yields. "We'll need you to come down to the station in Oak Haven to file formal charges, Ms. Moon," the senior officer told me quietly, his expression sympathetic. "This constitutes significant criminal damage, quite possibly at a felony level given the value." I nodded, numbly, my eyes fixed on the devastation. I watched as the officers escorted my father, my mother, and Cassandra off my land. My father's face was a mask of indignant disbelief, as if he were the wronged party. My mother refused to meet my gaze, her shoulders slumped. And Cassandra, as they were led towards their respective vehicles, my father would be taken to the station in a police car, turned and glared at me, her eyes filled with a raw, undiluted hatred. "This isn't over, Serafina," she called back, her voice venomous. "You've chosen the wrong side. You'll regret this." After the police cars had departed, after Mr. Gideon had squeezed my arm in a gesture of solidarity and returned to his own farm, I stood alone amidst the ruins of Havenwood Hollow. My beautiful, orderly rows of vegetables were now a chaotic morass of churned mud and broken stems. The polytunnel I had saved for months to purchase, the one that had promised such abundance, lay like a crumpled, discarded toy. Irrigation lines, so carefully laid, spurted water uselessly into the disturbed earth, creating new, unwanted pools. Only then, in the profound, echoing silence, did the full weight of it all crash down upon me. I sank to my knees in the dirt, amidst the wreckage of my dreams, and I wept. I sobbed until my throat was raw and my eyes burned, mourning not just the loss of my farm, but the irretrievable loss of the family I had once believed I possessed. The morning after the destruction, the harsh light of day seemed to amplify the devastation. What had seemed like a nightmare in the fading light of the previous evening was now a stark, brutal reality. The main polytunnel, my largest and most productive, was a complete write-off. Roughly 40% of my field-grown vegetable crops were either crushed or uprooted. The intricate irrigation system would require an almost total rebuild, and the soil in several large patches was so heavily compacted by the bulldozer's tracks that it would need months, perhaps years, of intensive remediation before it could support life again. I was listlessly taking photographs for insurance purposes, my heart a leaden weight in my chest, when a familiar van pulled into my driveway. It was Leo, the owner of the Riverside Hearth, one of Oakhaven's finest restaurants and one of my most loyal customers. He had come for his regular Thursday collection of specialty greens and heritage tomatoes. He stepped out of his van, a cheerful greeting dying on his lips as his gaze fell upon the scene of carnage. "Good heavens, Serafina," he breathed, his jovial face paling. "What on earth happened here?" My voice broke several times as I recounted the events of the previous day, the words tumbling out in a torrent of grief and disbelief. Leo listened, his expression growing grimmer with each detail. He didn't offer platitudes or empty reassurances. Instead, when I had finished, he simply pulled out his mobile phone. "Right," he said, his voice firm with resolve. "I'm calling everyone I know in the valley. You are not going through this alone, Serafina." By that afternoon, word of the attack on Havenwood Hollow had spread like wildfire through Viridian Valley's close-knit farming community. 3 neighboring farmers, men and women I knew from the market and agricultural meetings, arrived with tractors, tools, and offers of sturdy hands and willing hearts. The head chef from the farmer's table, another of my restaurant clients, brought her entire kitchen brigade, still in their whites, to help salvage what little produce remained undamaged. By sunset, a spontaneous triage system was in operation. We carefully harvested what could be saved, gently cleaned bruised but usable vegetables, and began the heartbreaking task of clearing the debris of what was irrevocably lost. In the midst of this whirlwind of support, I was also navigating the bewildering landscape of the legal aftermath. The morning after I formally filed the police report and pressed charges, I contacted Ms. Zara Khan, a solicitor in Oakhaven renowned for her expertise in property disputes and her tenacious advocacy. She listened with quiet intensity as I laid out the entire story, from Matilda's will to the horrific destruction, spreading out the documents I had brought, the deed, the will, my business records, the photographs, and the USB stick containing the security footage. "Your position is exceptionally strong, Serafina," Ms. Khan said, her voice calm and reassuring after I had finished, her keen eyes having missed no detail. "You have unassailable title to the property, comprehensive documentation of the damage, and clear, irrefutable video evidence identifying the perpetrators and their intent. However, she paused, her expression becoming more serious. This will not be a straightforward process, I fear. She slid a newly arrived document across her polished desk. Your family, through their own legal counsel, has already filed a petition with the court. They are formally contesting the validity of your grandmother Matilda's will, claiming she was unduly influenced when she made it. I stared at the legal jargon on the thick parchment, a fresh wave of disbelief washing over me. That's utterly preposterous. Grandma Matilda was as sharp as a tack, right until her final days. She knew precisely what she was doing. She was the most clear-headed woman I've ever known. They are alleging, Ms. Khan explained patiently, that you systematically manipulated her, isolated her from other family members, and effectively dictated the terms of the will to your benefit. It's a sadly common tactic in contentious inheritance disputes, even years after probate has been granted. It rarely succeeds when a will is as well-drafted as your grandmother's appears to be, but it serves to muddy the waters, to delay proceedings, and to increase emotional and financial pressure. Over the ensuing days, the situation became even more labyrinthine. Through Ms. Khan's diligent inquiries, we discovered that Damien Rexford, Cassandra's fiancé, was a senior partner at Apex Holdings Group, a large development corporation that had been aggressively acquiring agricultural land throughout Viridian Valley and neighboring counties for conversion into luxury housing estates. They had approached several of my fellow farmers with substantial offers, but most, valuing their heritage and way of life, had steadfastly refused to sell. They've been laying the groundwork for this for months, Serafina, Mr. Gideon told me, his weathered face grim, as he brought over a surprisingly thick folder of documents he had meticulously collected. Look at the dates on these preliminary zoning inquiries and environmental impact assessments. They were filed with the Valley Council a good 2 months before your sister Cassandra even returned to Oakhaven. The documents clearly showed applications for zoning changes specifically for my parcel of land at Havenwood Hollow, detailing plans remarkably similar to the Serene Meadows brochure, all dated well before that fateful Sunday gathering. My family hadn't just impulsively decided to claim my land. This had been a calculated, systematic campaign to dispossess me, with Damien Rexford and Apex Holdings pulling the strings. A week after the destruction, I received a formal letter from my family's solicitors. It was an audacious demand. I was to agree to a settlement, signing over the contested 3 acres to Cassandra, and in return, they would persuade my father to plead to a lesser misdemeanor charge, and they would drop their challenge to Matilda's will. The letter insinuated that my stubborn and unreasonable refusal to share family assets had provoked an understandable, if regrettable, emotional overreaction from my father. Ms. Khan advised me to reject the offer unequivocally. "They're attempting to intimidate you, Serafina," she said, her voice firm. "They gambled that you would crumble under the pressure, that the emotional toll of their actions would break your resolve. They have gravely underestimated your strength and the strength of your grandmother's legacy." I was, in truth, running on fumes of that strength during those harrowing weeks. Sleep became a scarce commodity, my nights haunted by fractured images of the bulldozer, of my father's rage-distorted face, of Cassandra's cold eyes. I lost weight I couldn't afford to lose, startled at every sudden noise, and found myself compulsively checking the security camera feeds on my phone, even in the dead of night. Havenwood Hollow, once my sanctuary, my place of peace and profound connection, now felt vulnerable, violated, every corner a painful reminder of what had been so violently taken. But I was not alone. The outpouring of support from the Viridian Valley community was a lifeline. A group of horticulture students from the nearby agricultural college, hearing of my plight, volunteered their weekends to help with the rebuilding, eager to learn practical skills while helping to restore my damaged land. My restaurant clients, led by Leo, organized a Friends of Havenwood Hollow fundraising dinner, featuring produce from my salvaged crops and contributions from other local farms. The event raised a significant sum, enough to cover immediate repair costs not yet addressed by my pending insurance claim. As we prepared for the inevitable court hearing regarding both the criminal charges against my father and my civil suit for damages, Ms. Khan helped me meticulously gather further evidence. We obtained records showing that Apex Holdings Group had indeed begun purchasing adjacent and nearby properties months before the attack. We procured minutes from informal meetings between my father, Cassandra, Damian Rexford, and certain members of the Valley Planning Council, discussing future development opportunities in the eastern part of Viridian Valley. Most damningly, Ms. Khan's investigator managed to recover a series of text messages that Cassandra, in her agitation, had accidentally sent to my farm's business landline voicemail instead of Damian's mobile. The transcribed messages were chillingly explicit. Dad says if we can just get her to crack now before the lawyers get too involved, the whole parcel will be clear for development by early spring. Damian, darling, think of the commission. Much bigger for us if we can move this quickly and quietly. Throughout this maelstrom, I had no direct contact with my parents or Cassandra, all communication filtered through our respective solicitors. But then, about 2 weeks before the scheduled court date, I received an unexpected visitor. Mr. Silas Thorne, Grandma Matilda's dear old friend and solicitor, the man who had read her will, came to Havenwood Hollow. He carried a worn, leather-bound journal. "Matilda asked me to give this to you, Serafina," he said, his kind eyes filled with a gentle sorrow as he handed me the journal, if there was ever any serious question raised about her wishes, or any attempt to challenge her decisions regarding Havenwood Hollow. She was a remarkably astute woman, your grandmother. Far sharper than many gave her credit for. She suspected, I think, that something like this might one day transpire. That evening, I sat in Matilda's old armchair by the newly repaired window, the journal open in my lap. It contained years of her private thoughts, her observations on life, on the land, and, poignantly, multiple entries about her decision to leave Havenwood Hollow solely to me. Serafina alone, she had written in her elegant, spidery script, truly understands the soul of this place. Arthur and Beatrice, bless them, have raised their daughters to value commerce and tangible assets above all else. Cassandra, I fear, has thoroughly absorbed those lessons. But Serafina, somehow my Serafina, escaped that particular trap. This land, this precious Havenwood Hollow, must never be developed. It must remain as it has been for generations, a place where things grow, where the soil is honored, where the rhythms of nature dictate life, and where profit is not the sole, nor even the primary, measure of its worth. Mr. Thorne also revealed that he possessed a video recording of my grandmother, made on the very day she signed her final will. In it, she clearly and articulately explained her reasoning, her wishes, and her unwavering conviction in her decision. I kept it in secure storage, as per her instructions, Mr. Thorne explained. Matilda didn't wish to cause unnecessary hurt or preemptive family strife, but she was adamant that her intentions be unequivocally clear, should the need arise. Armed with this powerful new evidence, Matilda's own words, her own voice, reaching out from beyond the veil, Ms. Khan felt our position was unassailable as we approached the court date. "They perceived you as an easy target, Serafina," she told me, a note of quiet satisfaction in her voice. "A gentle soul, easily intimidated. They never, for one moment, anticipated that you would fight back with such courage and such thoroughness." The night before I was due in court, I walked the paths of Havenwood Hollow in the soft, fading twilight. Parts of it were already showing remarkable signs of recovery, tender new seedlings pushing their way through the carefully amended soil where once there had been only churned mud and despair. I felt a profound, almost mystical connection to my grandmother Matilda in that moment, understanding with a new depth the sacred trust she had placed in me. Whatever the outcome in court the next day, I knew, with a certainty that resonated in my very core, that I had honored her legacy by defending Havenwood Hollow with all the strength I possessed. The Veridian County Courthouse was an imposing edifice of gray stone, its marble columns and echoing hallways speaking of sober tradition and the weight of the law. I arrived early with Ms. Khan, dressed in the most professional, understated outfit I owned, a simple navy dress and a tailored jacket. It felt strangely constricting after months spent in comfortable farm attire. We settled at our designated table in the modern, wood-paneled courtroom, arranging our binders of evidence and double-checking the audio-visual equipment Ms. Khan had requested for presenting the security footage. My family arrived together, a carefully constructed tableau of unity. My father, Arthur, in an impeccably tailored dark suit, his expression one of confident indignation rather than remorse. My mother, Beatrice, elegant and composed in muted colors, her gaze studiously avoiding mine. Cassandra and Damien Rexford entered last, hand in hand, whispering to each other with an air of shared purpose, occasionally flicking dismissive glances in my direction. "Remember, Serafina," Ms. Khan murmured, her voice a calm anchor as the judge entered and the court rose. "They will try to appeal to emotion, to paint this as a family tragedy. We will focus relentlessly on the facts, on the evidence." The hearing commenced with my family's barrister, a portly, florid-faced man with a booming voice and a theatrical courtroom manner. He painted a picture of idyllic family harmony tragically disrupted by what he termed an unfortunate and disproportionate inheritance. "Your Honor," he began, his voice resonating through the courtroom, "this is, at its heart, a simple, sad case of an unbalanced bequest causing understandable familial discord. The late Mrs. Matilda Moon, a beloved matriarch, undoubtedly intended her Veridian Valley property to ultimately benefit both her cherished granddaughters. Miss Serafina Moon, however, took undue advantage of her elderly grandmother's declining faculties, systematically isolating her from other concerned family members and subtly suggesting terms for a will that cruelly and unfairly excluded her devoted sister, Miss Cassandra Moon. He went on to describe me as stubborn, uncooperative, and ultimately selfish, a woman exploiting an old lady's alleged confusion to unjustly secure a valuable family legacy for herself alone. According to his narrative, my father's actions on that dreadful day, while perhaps ill-judged and certainly regrettable, were essentially an understandable emotional response to months of provocation and a desperate attempt to access family property that was being wrongfully, selfishly withheld. Cassandra was the first to take the stand for their side. She dabbed at her eyes with a lace-trimmed handkerchief as she described her profound sense of betrayal and exclusion when she learned that Grandma Matilda had left Havenwood Hollow entirely to me. "Serafina and I were always meant to share everything," she claimed, her voice thick with artfully projected emotion, though no such understanding had ever existed between us. She manipulated our grandmother when Matilda was at her most vulnerable, knowing I was hundreds of miles away, building my career in the city, unable to visit as often as I would have wished. She described returning to Veridian Valley to find me, in her words, indulgently playing at being a farmer on land that, she insisted, should have been generating income to benefit the entire family. Her testimony meticulously skirted any direct mention of the Serene Meadows development plans or Damien Rexford's company, Apex Holdings. "All we ever asked," Cassandra concluded, her voice trembling slightly, "was that she share what, in fairness and in spirit, should have been partly mine. She chose plants and dirt over her own sister." My parents testified next, both echoing the theme of my alleged selfish and uncooperative nature, dating back to childhood and reiterating their conviction that our grandmother had clearly been unduly influenced in her final years. My mother spoke with tearful sincerity about Cassandra's devastating career setback and how a share in the Havenwood Hollow asset could have provided a much-needed fresh start and healed the growing rift within the family. My father expressed deep, solemn regret for what he termed his momentary loss of control, but staunchly insisted his underlying intentions were merely to restore a measure of fairness to what he perceived as a profoundly unjust situation. "I just wanted my daughter Serafina to listen to reason, to see the bigger picture," he said, his voice breaking on cue. "That land has been connected to our family for generations. It should, by rights, benefit both my children, not just one." When it was our turn, Ms. Zara Khan's approach was a masterclass in calm, methodical deconstruction. She began by establishing the clear, undisputed timeline of events, presenting the legally registered property deed, the flawlessly executed will, and meticulously organized documentation proving that Havenwood Hollow had been profitably and sustainably operated as a legitimate agricultural business for over 3 years under my sole proprietorship. "Your Honor," she stated, her voice clear and firm, resonating with quiet conviction, "this case is not, as opposing counsel would have you believe, about family sharing or hurt feelings. It is about calculated greed, systematic deception, and the malicious, criminal destruction of private property. The evidence we will present will demonstrate a carefully orchestrated campaign to seize valuable land for speculative commercial development, using familial ties and emotional manipulation as leverage." She presented the security camera footage first. The courtroom was utterly silent as the large monitor displayed the crystal-clear video. My father, his face a mask of cold fury, methodically destroying my crops and structures, his shouted words, "This land belongs to your sister now. You should have signed," echoing chillingly in the otherwise still room. The judge's expression, hitherto impassive, visibly darkened as he watched. Next came the irrefutable documentation. The preliminary zoning requests filed by Apex Holdings months before our Sunday confrontation, clear evidence of Damien Rexford's senior partnership in the development company, and the transcribed text messages Cassandra had inadvertently sent to my business voicemail, explicitly revealing their plans for commission and their strategy to get her to crack. When I took the stand, I spoke simply, my voice low but steady, about my profound bond with my grandmother Matilda, our shared love for Havenwood Hollow, and the deep satisfaction I derived from the sustainable farming business I had painstakingly built there. I described the ambush at that Sunday gathering, showing the glossy, Serene Meadows brochure, the development plans they had commissioned without my knowledge, let alone my consent. "This was never truly about family sharing, Your Honor," I testified, meeting the judge's gaze directly. "This was, from the outset, about development profits. My sister Cassandra and her fiancé, Mr. Rexford, stood to make substantial personal financial gains if my land, Havenwood Hollow, could be acquired for their luxury housing project. The most profound and pivotal evidence, however, came when Ms. Khan, with a quiet dignity, introduced Grandma Matilda's leather-bound journal and submitted the video deposition that Mr. Silas Thorne had so prudently preserved. A hush fell over the courtroom as Matilda's clear, unwavering voice, filled with her characteristic gentle strength, filled the space via the audio speakers accompanying the video. "I hereby declare that I leave my property, known as Havenwood Hollow," she stated, looking directly into the camera, her gaze remarkably lucid, "entirely and solely to my granddaughter, Serafina Moon, with full and complete understanding of my actions and their implications. Serafina alone has demonstrated the passion, the commitment, and the understanding necessary to preserve this land as productive, sustainable farmland, in accordance with my deepest wishes. My son, Arthur, and his wife, Beatrice, have, on several occasions, suggested selling Havenwood Hollow for development. Their daughter, Cassandra, appears to share their perspective on such matters. I bear them no ill will, but I cannot, in good conscience, allow this precious land, which has nurtured our family for generations, to be covered in concrete and sterile housing. Serafina will honor its true purpose. Of this, I am certain." As the video concluded, a stunned silence hung in the air, broken only when Cassandra suddenly leapt to her feet, her face flushed, her carefully constructed composure shattering. "This is utterly ridiculous," she cried out, her voice shrill, forgetting herself entirely. "We are talking about millions of pounds of potential value being utterly wasted on vegetables and bees. That old woman, with all due respect, Your Honor, simply didn't understand modern financial realities. She was living in the past." "Miss Moon, you will control yourself immediately," the judge warned sharply, his gavel rapping once on the bench. "But why should I?" Cassandra raged on, ignoring her barrister's frantic attempts to silence her, to pull her back down. "Serafina has been the favored one since we were children. Grandma's perfect little gardener, always so quiet and good, while I was out in the real world, building a proper career. And now she gets to sit on this prime piece of real estate, playing farmer while the rest of us. This land could set our entire family up for life. It's simply not fair, Your Honor. It's not right." Damien Rexford's voice, tight with anxiety, cut in as he tried to placate Cassandra, to salvage the situation. "Your Honor, the proposed development plans, which were purely conceptual, of course, would have included significant green space, ecological corridors, and numerous sustainability features." "Development plans, Mr. Rexford?" the judge interrupted, his voice like ice, his gaze fixing on Damien witheringly. "For a property you do not own, and for which you had no permission to make such plans? Are you wishing to offer sworn testimony now as well, sir?" The courtroom erupted in a low murmur of voices as a mortified Cassandra was finally persuaded to sit down, still fuming, her outburst having laid bare the raw, avaricious motives that underpinned their entire case. "My family's barrister attempted a valiant, but ultimately futile effort at damage control, but the carefully constructed narrative of a simple family misunderstanding had been utterly demolished by Cassandra's raw, unfiltered greed." In his closing statement, their barrister weakly suggested a compromise, a division of the property that might still benefit all parties. Ms. Khan, in her rebuttal, was unequivocal. She requested full restitution for all damages, both physical and to my business, substantial punitive damages for the malicious intent, the immediate imposition of permanent restraining orders, and a clear, unambiguous judgment affirming my sole and rightful ownership of Havenwood Hollow. When the judge delivered his ruling, his words were like balm to my wounded spirit, clear, decisive, and unequivocal. "This court finds absolutely no credible evidence whatsoever to support the claim of undue influence in the matter of Mrs. Matilda Moon's last will and testament. The will is valid. The property known as Havenwood Hollow was legally and properly transferred to Miss Serafina Moon, who has, by all accounts, demonstrated responsible and diligent stewardship of said property. The court further finds, based on overwhelming evidence including clear video footage and direct admissions, that Mr. Arthur Moon did knowingly, willfully, and maliciously cause extensive criminal damage to property belonging to Miss Serafina Moon, resulting in financial losses preliminarily estimated in excess of £60,000, but likely to be significantly higher when accounting for lost business revenue and future crop yield diminution. He awarded me full compensatory damages, to be precisely determined in a subsequent assessment, plus an additional £40,000 in punitive damages. He issued permanent restraining orders, preventing my father, my mother, and Cassandra from coming within 500 feet of my person or the boundaries of Havenwood Hollow. Finally, he formally referred the criminal charges of malicious damage and conspiracy to commit damage to the district attorney's office for vigorous prosecution. Furthermore, he added, his gaze sternly fixed on my father, who now looked ashen and utterly defeated, "This court is profoundly disturbed by the substantial body of evidence suggesting this was not merely an isolated family disagreement that escalated, but rather a premeditated and coordinated attempt to unlawfully seize valuable private property for the purposes of commercial development. The district attorney may well wish to investigate potential additional charges of conspiracy and fraud in this matter." As we left the courtroom, my family avoided my gaze. My father's expensive suit seemed to hang on him, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. My mother appeared stunned into silence, her face pale. Cassandra was whispering frantically to Damien Rexford, whose polished professional demeanor had entirely crumbled, revealing a man clearly out of his depth and facing serious professional repercussions. They had walked into that courtroom expecting to intimidate me into submission, to leverage family ties and emotional blackmail to achieve their aims. Instead, they were leaving in disgrace, their reputations in tatters, facing the very real prospect of criminal convictions and severe financial penalties. "It's over, Serafina," Ms. Khan said softly, her hand resting briefly on my shoulder in a gesture of quiet triumph and solidarity. "They can, of course, appeal, but given the strength of the evidence and the judge's unequivocal ruling, they won't succeed." But as I watched my parents and my sister walk away, their shoulders slumped, their unity now one of shared defeat, I knew that something far more profound than a legal case had concluded that day. The family I thought I had, the bonds I had once cherished, were gone, perhaps had never truly existed in the way I had perceived them. They had been replaced by the chilling reality of strangers who had been willing to destroy everything I loved, everything I had built, for the cold allure of profit. The victory felt hollow in that moment, the courtroom air thick with the ghosts of what might have been. The legal victory, while a profound vindication, didn't bring immediate solace. I returned to Havenwood Hollow, to a landscape still bearing the deep, visible scars of the destruction. Standing amidst the twisted metal of what was once my main polytunnel, the late afternoon sun casting long, mournful shadows, I felt an overwhelming wave of despair wash over me. The court's judgment would, in time, provide the financial means to rebuild, but no sum of money could instantly replace lost growing seasons, erase the trauma, or restore my shattered sense of security and peace. For several days, I existed in a kind of limbo, barely functioning. I slept fitfully on the old sofa in the living room rather than in my own bed, the farmhouse suddenly feeling too large, too empty. I ate sparingly, mostly the kind offerings of casseroles and bread that Mr. Gideon and other neighbors quietly left on my doorstep. I found myself staring blankly out of the windows at the damaged fields, the thought of starting over, of summoning the energy and hope required to rebuild, feeling utterly insurmountable. Perhaps my family had been right about one thing, a small, insidious voice whispered in the lonely hours. Perhaps I was foolish to believe I could truly make a life here, to maintain this sanctuary alone. Then, on a damp, gray Tuesday morning, nearly 3 weeks after the court hearing, I was startled by the sound of multiple vehicles rumbling up my long driveway. My heart lurched with a familiar dread, but forcing myself to peer through the rain-streaked kitchen window, I saw not a threat, but a small caravan of pickup trucks and familiar cars. Leo from the Riverside Hearth stepped out of the lead vehicle, his round face set with a determined kindness, followed by at least 20 other people, faces I recognized from local farms, from the Oakhaven Market, from the Agricultural College, even a few of my regular Harvest Box customers. "We figured you'd grieved long enough, Serafina," Leo said, his voice gentle but firm, as I opened the door, blinking in surprise. Time to roll up our sleeves. Time to rebuild Havenwood Hollow. That day marked the true beginning of my healing, not just for the ravaged land, but for my own bruised and battered spirit. The Viridian Valley farming community, the quiet network of souls I had gradually, almost unknowingly, become a part of over the preceding years, rallied around me in ways I could never have anticipated or imagined. Neighboring farmers, their own schedules already demanding, donated precious seedlings and young plants to replace what had been destroyed. Restaurant owners, Leo among them, prepaid for future orders, easing the immediate cash flow crisis. The horticulture students from the Agricultural College formally adopted the rebuilding of Havenwood Hollow as a special class project, applying innovative sustainable design principles to help create structures that would be even more resilient and productive than before. What had once felt like a solitary, sometimes overwhelming, venture became a vibrant, collective effort. Each weekend brought a fresh wave of volunteers, their laughter and purposeful energy slowly chasing away the lingering shadows of despair. They helped clear debris, mend fences, erect new polytunnel frames, prepare soil, and plant anew. I learned, slowly and sometimes awkwardly, to accept help, to share the burden that had felt so crushingly heavy when I believed I had to bear it alone. Havenwood Hollow, my cherished sanctuary, began to transform from a site of painful memories into a place of shared purpose, a testament to the quiet power of community. With the insurance settlement finally processed and the initial tranche of the court-awarded damages received, I was able to implement designs that were not just repairs, but genuine improvements. The new main polytunnel incorporated advanced passive solar heating and rainwater harvesting features. The redesigned irrigation system was more water-efficient and robust. We terraced the sections of land most heavily compacted by the bulldozer, creating new, beautifully tiered growing beds with improved drainage and sun exposure. As the physical landscape of Havenwood Hollow began to heal and flourish anew, I also embarked on the quieter, more challenging work of tending to my emotional wounds. I found a compassionate therapist in Oakhaven, a wise older woman whose gentle guidance helped me to process the profound betrayal and grief, to understand that the actions of my family were a reflection of their own brokenness, not a measure of my worth. I learned that family isn't solely defined by blood relations, but by the bonds of love, respect, and mutual support that connect us to those who see and cherish our authentic selves. My grandmother Matilda had understood this with a clarity that I was only now beginning to grasp. About 6 months after the destruction, long after the rebuilding was well underway, I received an unexpected letter. It was from my mother, Beatrice, written on her personal, monogrammed stationery rather than the formal family letterhead. Serafina, it began, her familiar, elegant script looking somewhat hesitant on the page. I am writing this without your father's knowledge or consent. What happened at Havenwood Hollow, what we allowed to happen, what we actively participated in, was unforgivable. I will not offer excuses for my part in that dreadful day, for there are none that would suffice. Watching you in that courtroom, Serafina, standing so firm, so dignified, despite everything we had put you through, I saw so much of Matilda's quiet strength in you. She would have been immensely proud. I am not asking for your forgiveness, nor am I seeking reconciliation at this time. I simply wanted you to know that at least one of us fully recognizes the profound wrong that was done to you. The letter wasn't signed with love or any of the usual maternal endearments, just her stark signature, Beatrice Moon. I never replied, but I carefully folded the letter and placed it within the pages of Grandma Matilda's journal. It was an acknowledgement, if not a full apology, and in some small, inexplicable way, it helped to soothe a tiny corner of the vast ache in my heart, allowing a sliver of light into a very dark space. Around the same time, I heard through Mr. Gideon, who seemed to possess an uncanny knack for knowing all the Valley's news, that Cassandra and Damien Rexford had separated. Apex Holdings Group had apparently distanced itself from Damien following the very public and damaging court case, and Cassandra, it was rumored, had been less than thrilled with his consequently diminished financial prospects and social standing. My father, Arthur, ultimately received a suspended sentence for the criminal damage, along with a substantial fine and a lengthy community service order. He and my mother, I learned indirectly, had sold their large house on the outskirts of Oakhaven and moved to another county, away from the whispers, the knowing glances, and the palpable judgment of the Viridian Valley community they had once held in such high esteem. On the first anniversary of the day Havenwood Hollow was attacked, I hosted a harvest supper. Long, rustic trestle tables laden with simple, beautiful food were set up in the central garden area, the very space that had been so brutally torn apart, now flourishing with an almost defiant abundance. Seated around those tables were nearly 40 people, neighbors, fellow farmers, loyal customers, the students from the agricultural college, Leo and his staff, Ms. Khan, Mr. Thorne, all individuals who had, in ways large and small, contributed to Havenwood Hollow's resurrection. We ate dishes prepared almost entirely with ingredients grown on the recovered land, a tangible, joyous feast of resilience and renewal. In that intervening year, Havenwood Hollow had not only recovered but had, in many ways, expanded and deepened its roots. The publicity from the court case, while initially unwelcome and deeply painful, had inadvertently shone a spotlight on the importance of sustainable farming practices and the value of local food systems. I now supplied produce to twice as many restaurants in Viridian Valley and beyond. My stall at the Oakhaven Farmers Market was a bustling hub of activity each Saturday morning, and my Harvest Box CSA, community-supported agriculture, subscription service had grown to capacity, nourishing 50 local families each week. More importantly, however, I had discovered the profound, life-affirming power of chosen family over the often fraught complexities of biological ties. The neighbors who had offered unsolicited help, the customers who had shown unwavering loyalty, the fellow farmers who had shared their knowledge and resources, the volunteers who had given their time and energy so generously. These people had become my true community, my tribe, connected not by shared DNA, but by shared values of kindness, respect for the land, and mutual support. My grandmother Matilda, in her infinite wisdom, had perhaps foreseen this very potential when she entrusted Havenwood Hollow to me, understanding that this land could serve as an anchor not just for my life, but for a whole network of life-enriching relationships. To honor her foresight and her enduring spirit, I established the Matilda Moon Grant for young agrarians at the local agricultural college, a small annual bursary to support a deserving student who demonstrated a genuine commitment to sustainable farming and land stewardship. It felt like the most fitting way to ensure her legacy continued to bear fruit, creating new possibilities for others who, like me, heard the quiet call of the land. As I walked the flourishing fields of Havenwood Hollow on these quiet, luminous evenings, the scent of chamomile and thyme rising from the earth with each step, I often reflect on the profound lessons this challenging journey has etched upon my soul. I have learned that protecting one's boundaries is not an act of selfishness, but a vital necessity for preserving what is truly sacred and important. I have discovered that forgiveness, true forgiveness, does not always necessitate reconciliation, and that moving forward with grace sometimes means gently, lovingly, leaving certain relationships behind, allowing them to become part of the past, like fallen leaves enriching the soil for new growth. Most profoundly, I have come to understand that my grandmother Matilda's greatest gift to me was not just the 7 acres of Havenwood Hollow itself, but her unwavering belief in the strength of character she had recognized within me, a strength I had not, until tested, fully recognized in myself. The soil, the plants, the bustling life of the farm, these are but the external manifestations of more vital, internal qualities: persistence in the face of adversity, resilience in the wake of loss, and the quiet courage to defend, with unwavering resolve, that which you hold true and believe in. The farm that was so nearly destroyed now thrives with an even greater abundance, a richer biodiversity, than before. The scars, of course, remain visible in certain places: the slightly different hue of the new polytunnel's cladding, the sturdy young fruit trees replacing those ancient ones that could not be saved, the gentle terracing on the slope where the bulldozer wrought its worst devastation. But these are no longer solely reminders of trauma. They stand as testaments to the enduring power of hope, to the beauty of rebuilding, and to the profound truth that sometimes, from the deepest wounds, can emerge something even more meaningful, more resilient than what was lost. What is your story of standing firm when you felt pressured to relinquish something precious to you? Has there been a time when someone attempted to take what was rightfully, or morally, yours, and how did you navigate that storm? I would be so honored to hear your experiences and reflections in the comments below. If this story of Havenwood Hollow has resonated with you, if it has touched your heart in some way, please do consider liking this, sharing, and subscribing to hear more tales of overcoming life's unexpected challenges, of finding strength in unforeseen places, and of cultivating a life rooted in authenticity and purpose. Thank you so much for listening, and please remember, as I have learned, that sometimes the family we choose, the community we build, can be even more nourishing and valuable than the one into which we are born. Your support, your presence here, truly means the world to me.